Welcome to Shorty SuperCoach and welcome to another video. Just 3 days now until round one, so it's very exciting and we want to really hone in on our sides, of course. So I thought it would be good to go through each line, and we'll be starting with the back line today and just talk about all the relevant players, probably guys that are in at least 2 or 3% of sides, and just give a snippet of what I think, because I try to cover off on as many players as I can, but obviously there's probably still guys that you're thinking, gee, I wonder what he thinks of that fella or this guy. So hopefully this video can attend to that. I'll just work my way down. And some guys I might touch on for 10 seconds. Others I might find myself discussing a little bit longer. So I'm not sure how long the video will go for. But look, hopefully you can find the part that you are after. So I'll look to timestamp this one as well. Thanks to everyone who's jumped on board of late. We're pushing towards that 2,000 subscriber mark pretty nicely. The last few weeks have been really good. So if you're new to the channel, thank you very much. And as always, if you've been around for the journey, as always, appreciate that. And there'll be a league code out tonight, 9 o'clock. So that'll be, I think, the second of 4 leagues. So hopefully you can get into that too. But look, here we go. I will go through the players starting at the top, and we'll touch off on a few. Obviously, Lloyd. I've made my thoughts on Lloyd pretty clear over this pre-season. He's not for me. Now, it's not to say that I don't think he's going to have a good season. I think he'll average in the early hundreds, perhaps around the 105 mark. But I just feel for a guy who has never had those sort of numbers before, to pay upward of 600k is extremely risky, and for me, I was more comfortable with Laird. So if you're going with Lloyd, which a quarter of the competition are, I can understand that, but just remember he's only had one premium season. So I just get concerned when guys don't have the runs on the board year on year and they have that sort of a price tag. Laird, I don't have to say much about him. 38% of sides, he's clearly extremely popular, and he just never lets you down. Brodie Smith coming in the side, I hope doesn't change things too much, but I doubt it will. He's a ball magnet, just links up and finds his way on the end of handballs beautifully, and he'll service nicely again. And he was just a touch cheaper than Lloyd, and that in the end was basically the tipping point for me. Sicily is an interesting one because I think there's been a bit of talk about him potentially being a swingman and going forward, and that's obviously a recipe for disaster for SuperCoach. Yeah, he might kick a goal or two, but he's made his name, and particularly a SuperCoach name, averaging 105 last year as a rebounding defender and an intercepting defender. Gosh, he's got amazing hands and a beautiful boot. So we do not want to see him move. Now, he's in 13% of sides. That number has dropped consistently over the pre-season, and particularly so once we heard that news. For all Sicily fans out there, we're going to hope that he doesn't spend too much time in that forward line, but I think people probably have enough right to be scared off. And I've never had him in my team this season, but it would have scared me off if I did. The fact that even if he could play the majority in the back line, it might just be 4 or 5 games, maybe even 3, where he gets thrown around, or even the odd half or a quarter, and it can just turn a good score and just to an okay score. And you just want your premiums being predictable. And the fact that, like with Lloyd, Sicily is young and has only done on one occasion, which, slight risk, but he looks to be a really good performer down back. Simpson just keeps on giving. He's been around for a long time and he's had great numbers for basically his entire career. Rebounding defender, and I think we were prepared to write him off last year. Then Doherty went down, and the same thing has happened again. Obviously he benefits without Doherty being there because he becomes the clear rebounder for the Blues. He would still and was still producing good numbers when Doherty was playing, but Doherty was their main man out of the back line. And for him to produce 105 average was pretty impressive. And I drafted him in SuperCoach Draft last night, which I'll hopefully have a video up at some point. And I was pleased with that selection. He's not going in my classic team, but gee, he's as reliable as they come. I would doubt that he'd average 105, but I said the same thing last year. So I would envision somewhere between 95 and 100 for Simpson. As I grab a glass of water. And Whitfield, many of you would know my strong thoughts on him. I think he's going to be the number one defender. I'm extremely confident. I think the fact he's in 30% of sides suggests that a lot of people are agreeing. He'll play through the middle at times. He'll roll off the half back at times. But he's just so clean. He's a beautiful kick. And I just think he's at a handy price. I genuinely think 540 is value. I think the fact that he didn't break the ton last year, pushed it mighty close, mind you. But I think if he didn't average 3 figures, I'd be very surprised. And I love when we get the option of a premium that has upside and a little bit of value. I just think it's a great combination. So, clearly those 5 guys are what many of you are delivering on your probably top 2 or 3 defenders. It starts to get a little more interesting from here. Hurn, in the 7% of sides, it's a big no from me. I think last year was a great season for him, but there's just something that the gut feel is last year will be his career best season in terms of those numbers. I know he's had 90 averages before, but in contrast to Whitfield, I don't see much upside in Hurn, and I don't see the stability. He's had, let me just check. I'm pretty confident in what I'm saying, but I think he's had some fluctuations, so he hasn't had consistent premium numbers, and he is, beyond 30, so we're not going to see huge improvement, but 96, 88, 82, 75, 86, 87, 91, and then that 93 back there. To me, I think last year was a great season. The Eagles got rolling, outstanding. He led from the front, brilliant. But I just think we'll look back on his career and say that was his best numbers. They were his best numbers. And there's something just turns me off when you're picking a guy at his very peak and probably is just going to average mid-90s. I don't see that average going up. So I'd be steering clear. Crisp in 6% of sides, a very, very solid option, an underrated player. If you want to go someone different, he's not a bad option. Now, he's found his way into the Collingwood back half and floats up higher at times too, finds himself in a lot of chains and unheralded to an extent. Again, he's not in my team, he's not for me. I just feel he's a solid option without being too sexy, if you get what I mean. He's probably his 95.8. It's probably about what you're going to get, probably anywhere from that 93 to 98. Obviously, he could do anything, but that would be my prediction. Not the worst point of difference. Doherty, obviously, we know the case with him. Jeremy Howe, I don't mind him as an option, but I'd have to say no. He's had some good numbers in the past, but as I, again, defer, he's shown signs of averaging high 90s, but again, such is the nature of a role when you are his type of player. I think if we got the guarantee that he'd be intercepting all season, fantastic. But at times, he has been forced to lock down a bit more, or at least play a little bit more defensively. How does the 6, 6, and 6 adjust for Howe? Can he be that +1? Of course, once the centre bounce carries on for the next few minutes, things will be normal. But I think he's probably your solid 90-ish. And I think these numbers here are about spot on. I think best case scenario, he lifts to about 95. But for me, I like to have a little bit more upside than that. And I think it is, he's outstanding on his day, a beautiful pair of hands, as we know. But as is the case with key defenders, he's not quite key, but he is more of a post. They might have those handful of days where they're forced to play a little tighter, and that hurts. Suckling, he's in 0% of sides, so no point really discussing. Heath Shaw, 3% of sides. It's a hard no from me. I know there was a little mini reprieve last year with the Giants' lack of rebound from defence, and he was again called upon. But we've seen the signs of his decline, and those numbers will not be getting better. So I know people get excited about the kick-in rule and that, but don't do it. He's on the decline. He's not the main man out of defence for the Giants anymore. It's a definite no from me. Hurley, I'm a big fan of Michael Hurley, big fan, but unfortunately his role has seen big differences in his scoring. He, once upon a time, was looking like a key defender that you could genuinely pick with confidence, and I'll show you a few numbers. Yeah, a bit low on battery. I probably should have thought that through. But, you know, high 90s, I believe it was, for at least one season. But a change in role which saw him getting less cheap possession and playing a little tighter. You know, 102 and 94 was the other one. So, look, he follows a similar line to Jeremy Howe. He's going to have some really good days, but it did seem as if the Bombers were preferring him to not play as loose. I remember he copped criticism in the media. Stop getting the cheap kicks, just stop your man. And I think best case scenario is probably mid-90s for Hurley. So I wouldn't endorse it. And the same can be said for Luke Ryan. I think he has a bit more scope for improvement, and I think he's underrated, probably because he's just in Western Australia, but I would not be surprised to see an average around that 96 mark, which is probably enough, but there's risk there, clearly. You know, he would be a real point of difference in 2% of sides, but he's not the worst point of difference. I would imagine, not that I know any Dockers fans, but if you spoke to Fremantle supporters, they would really sing the praise of Ryan. I would imagine he's much loved within their four walls. Probably hasn't received as much SuperCoach love, but I think he probably deserves it, and I expect a pretty good season. McVeigh not getting much love. McGovern, no. Don't pick it. I think we're just getting a little carried away with this intercepting McGovern and the last play in the grand final. It's very romantic to pick him, but he just has not shown any ability to go big for prolonged periods. I'm just going to have a look at his stats, and you know, he's just been around that high 80s, early 90s, and early 90s was 90.7. So there's nothing there to suggest that he's going to go bang. There's no reason. I think he is a beautiful interceptor and will have those days where he dominates the air, but I don't think he gets involved enough in general play and link up. So therefore, he just isn't getting those extra few points. So I'd steer clear, to be honest. Savage is in 1% of sides. Breaking my rule to talk about him, but I wouldn't surprise me if he lifted his average definitely into the 90s. He hurt a few last year, but I definitely think he'll move into the 90s. And there is scope. There'll be different dynamic in that St Kilda backline, and depending how it falls will definitely favour some. Will it favour Savage? We'll have to wait and see. Probably a few too many moving parts, and he's teased a little bit too much in the past to really go with him. But I definitely think, in terms of value, there is some there. Andrews, very, very good player, but I wouldn't be selecting him for SuperCoach. No love for Webster, Jonas. Johannisson's obviously missing some time at the early parts of the season. Jayden Short, don't mind this at all. 465k. If you're looking for a guy for your D3, a bit like what I've done with Witherden, obviously I would endorse Witherden. I think he's the better option. But Short's not far behind. I think he's looked pretty good through the pre-season. I think we'll see steady improvement in his numbers. It may not be enough to warrant selection, but if he's in your team, I understand why. I'm not going to jump off the roof and say definitely pick him, you know, it's crazy, you've got to get him, but I don't mind him. I don't mind him. Option. How does Bachar Houli playing more footy affect it? That might scare you off. It might, you know, are they going to share it too much? Potentially. I don't know. But he's a lovely kick. They like getting the ball in his hands. That's generally two key elements for defenders we look for. He's got them both. Stewart, I'm a big fan of him as a cat. I wouldn't be picking him for SuperCoach. I think he's a nice little option in the draft. A cheeky one that some may not be onto. Who have we got there? You know, Henderson and Kolajasny or Blitzarves will make up some of the key posts. So Stewart is going to play that intercepting role, third up into the contest, and he plays it really well. I just think it's far too risky to go with him. Again, we haven't seen those numbers. I think when I look at 85.3, 463k, there's value and upside, but I don't see it going in the mid-90s, which is what we'd be after. And as I scan through Thomas, Blakely, Tui, Witherden is a man that I see that scope with. He's in my team, as you can see. You guys can see most on the side there. I'll be revealing it soon enough anyway. You saw it in, what was it, the JLT wrap. It hasn't changed since then. But Witherden, I think he's got big scope to go right up. The Lions love it in his hands. He's a lovely ball user, talented youngster. Had his share of injuries. I think that average injury aside still would be around 87, 88. So I feel like I don't need a big increase for him to go right up. And the kick-in rule, it's important to not get carried away with what sort of effect that can have, but he will be a beneficiary in some way, shape or form. And I'm a big fan of him. And I'm surprised he's in 9% of sides. I can only imagine that was because of a lukewarm JLT, but I think he just played 3/4 in both. So I hope it scares a few off, because I think any point of difference element I can get with him, I'm happy with. We'll scan through a couple there. Rance, I think people are getting sucked into the name there. I know at his best he can be outstanding, but I think he got found out a couple of times last year, and one-on-one he's susceptible, and the 666, I think, you know, it's not going to, he's still an outstanding player, but that role of him just being the +1 all game is not going to be there. For most of the game he still can, but I just worry whether teams, particularly in that prelim final, were starting to go through his man a bit, and again, that key defender status, gee, you've got to be confident, and I would not be picking him. I wouldn't be surprised if we see some really good scores, don't get me wrong, but I think he's averaged high 90s before. I wouldn't be expecting that. We'll scan through a couple of these guys, given their low ownerships and not stack of interest. Wayne Milera, really like him, and I was big on him last year, and I drafted him last year, I think. He seems like that guy that is spoken about a lot. You know, he's so talented. What a kick. Smooth mover. You know, we hear all these things, but it's yet to translate into good average. The body has let him down. But if pre-season's anything to go by, he looks really, really good. So I guess if you're looking for someone who isn't Witherden, around that price range, I don't mind him at all. I think the pros are going to start to really respond. I guess the discussion might be, you know, you've got Smith, you've got Laird, Miller is in there. I feel like I'm probably forgetting someone. Nonetheless, you've got a few guys who are hoping to rebound and play up sort of towards that wing. He's another one. If you like him, well, I can't blame you, because he's a talent and he's shown some good signs and seems to be ready for that breakout. So I can understand the theory behind that. Callum Mills, 8% of sides. I drafted him last night too. Really stoked to get him when I did in the draft. 428k offers great value. And to be honest, Witherden or Mills, it's still something I'm considering to an extent, because it does look like Mills is going to play through the middle. And as I've touched on, I do need to find coin elsewhere. When push comes to shove, do I find an extra 30k in the way of this? Maybe. I'm not too sure. I'm hoping the teams, you know, there can be a surprise 102k rookie. But at this point in time, I'm just too light on, and I don't have the rookies I want yet. So that's a bit off on a tangent. But the fact is, Mills put his hand up as a genuine mid. JPK looks to be taking a slight step back. You know, Hanbury has left. McVeigh obviously doesn't play through the middle anymore. We're talking that next wave. We're talking Heaney. We're talking Mills. So it's something to think about. It's something to think about, and I'll be doing some thinking. But I would be endorsing him at the minute. Obviously, I've had Witherden for most of the pre-season, but you got to find coins somewhere. And Mills may just make it a bit tough. You know, he's looked outstanding through the pre-season, and we know how talented he is. We know that he's at some stage hoping to develop into a really good midfielder after sort of plying his trade off a half-back flank, but could be this year. Moving along, now we can sort of start to scan through and skip over a few of these guys. Zac Williams, I don't have to talk much about that. I think he's an out-and-out lock. I know he didn't play every JLT and people might get a bit scared off, but he's looked great every time he's stepped out, including the final last year. And at that price, you've just got to have him. You've just got to have him. You can't afford to not if he does go bang. I mean, you'll just be missing out big time. As we float down, Bachar Houli and Hibberd. Again, Houli was a guy drafted late last night and pleased. I mean, I'd be surprised if he didn't increase that average significantly. I would envision a high 80s sort of average. I think the days of him really racking it up and being a genuine premium are gone. Just with his body and his age, and again, short is going to affect him. Like I mentioned, Houli could affect short. So I would, if I'm a betting man, I'd say somewhere between 87 and 92. And that's probably not enough for me. Underpriced, bit of value, but it's a no from me. And Hibberd just hasn't shown enough. I think that's a bit of a selection of 3% of people who see the name and go, gee whiz, he's cheap. But we just haven't seen consistency from a man who was once considered a lock, outstanding seasons of years gone by. Too risky for mine. Newman, 394. I think we needed to see more from him through the pre-season. I don't think we would have... He's the sort of guy you'd have in your team pre-JLT and go, if he can perform just one game, I'd be keeping him. And from my knowledge, I know he wasn't great in the second one, and I don't recall anything amazing as the Bombers. So still in 8% of sides, but it's not like he's dirt cheap. And I don't know if we're romanticising about how well he treated us as a swan and a cash cow. At 394, you need significant improvement from there, and he just hasn't put together full seasons and consistent scoring. So again, I would be steering clear, would be my advice. Andrew McGrath, I'm a massive fan of him. Massive fan. 17% of sides. And I understand why. Big fan. I got him in the draft too. Very late. Very pleased. The only thing I would say is the fact that Essendon's midfield does back quite deep now, particularly with Shield coming in. You've got Heppel, you've got Merritt. There's probably a couple of guys I've left out. Does he get enough minutes in there? Is it more on a wing? Either way, those numbers are going up. He's not going to average around 70. But he could be anything. I mean, he could come out and average high 90s, which I'm sure 17% of you are hoping. But it's a real thought that he could come out and average around 85, high 80s, which is good, but not great. And I think we'd need more. So something to consider. I thought he looked great against Carlton. Probably hasn't given me enough to go with. But does he have enough responsibility through the midfield? Will he get enough minutes? Will he be right in the contest? So a couple of things to think about. But his talent cannot be denied, that's for sure. I've probably covered off on the main guys you want to hear. Burton's an interesting one. Again, I don't think we've seen enough sort of established role. Very talented player, and unders for what he can do. Francis, I think people are probably being lulled into what was outstanding footy we saw, but again, he's 350k. It's not like he's a steal. So for me, I just would not be spending that amount of coin on a guy who's probably played 5 or 10 really good scoring games at a guess. I know he's a former high pick and he's had his troubles with a range of things, but I think there's a risk there, and it's that old risk versus reward. I don't see his ceiling being high enough, and I feel like he'd need to be more around your 250 to 300, and he's well over that. I'm I know he looks like a good intercept mark and he's had a couple of good games, but the body of work probably is not there. So that would be my in a nutshell thoughts on him. Just scrolling through, I mean, Brodie Smith has really gone up, 39%. And I'm not a big fan. Is it once bitten, twice shy? I mean, he let me down in the past, and I'll refer to my numbers. He's a sensational kick, and he'll kick goals from outside 50, and he'll benefit from the new rule. I don't think it's enough. I don't think, and it's a bit of an intangible, how can you really assess it? But my read is that he doesn't get involved in general play enough. He's more of a specialist guy. You know, give it to Smith and use his boot. I don't know if he links up in handball or gets into a stoppage or intercepts all that much. I just wonder if he's a bit one-dimensional in terms of scoring. 93 was outstanding, but since then it's always been that topic of conversation is this the year that he comes back? Is this the year? Oh, he's got value, and he is yet to do it. And I know there's been injury last year, hence the price tag, but I just don't think so. I really don't think so. He's going to be value there. So it's hard to argue the value element because at 330, we're starting to get cheap. And he has runs on the board and an identified role. But for me, I have just fallen elsewhere. I've taken some mid-price options in different positions. I'm not going to say don't pick Smith like I have with a couple other guys, but he's just not a fella that I found myself really considering. So, yeah, it's just my thought. I just question whether we'll see some outstanding passes and he'll take the kick-ins and he'll feed off a handball, gather, kick it from 55. He'll have a highlights reel, but will that just end up to averaging 86, 87? Maybe that's enough at that price. It's up to you. And from memory, there's probably, I mean, we'll scroll across Darcy Moore. Obviously, we know the sad situation with Robertson. Pearce Hanley, I snared in the draft late. I was really pleased with that. He looks to be playing pretty good footy. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw his numbers jump up to the high 80s. Definite in the 80s. We know what he can do. But you'd have to have balls of steel to go with him. You just couldn't go with him, surely. But a few percent are. I don't know if there's too much more here aside from Darcy Moore, which I will inevitably stumble across soon. Yeah, I think we've covered it off pretty nicely. And, of course, there's more in 26% of sides. And he's looked good, I must say. He's taken a few kick-ins. He's really setting up aggressively, you know, positioning himself well to intercept. And that's when he's on his own man, you know, one-on-one. We're not going to see sort of him just playing loose. He's definitely the sort of guy that they're wanting to really go quite nicely. And I think we will definitely see a higher average. I mean, his body's got to be a concern. There's no doubt about that. Where's his scoring at? It's tough to say. What do I expect? Because I was big on him probably a few weeks back. He's got a big range. If I'm guessing, I'd say 75 to high 80s. I think if he really got going, we could see a real good average. And obviously that's why quite a few are going with him. I think if he didn't have such a poor injury history, I probably would go with him. But just the way it's fallen, it just hasn't made my side. I cut him to get some coin to spend elsewhere with some of my midfield madness, some may call it. But I think he's a good pick. I like it. He just hasn't found his way into my team. Jordan Ridley in 10% of sides. Am I missing something? I'm sure he's going to get opportunity. I must be missing something there. Please inform me. I've seen the bloke play. I know what he's about. I just would not have thought, considering some of the names we scroll past, that Ridley, okay, maybe at 123, but not not 233. Anyway, I think that just about sums it up. I don't think, obviously we're getting into rookie territory now, so And most of those guys will reveal themselves in the teams. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to pick good rookies. But look, I've done this one in my car. It's pretty bloody hot. I should have left the window down. It's bloody warm in here, but I hope this video has been of benefit to you. I've covered off a lot of names. I wanted to just give you a little snippet, a bit like the AFL prospectus. You know, you flick along to this, and really see just in a few sentences what it's about and what my thoughts are. Because I've touched on some guys more than others, so there might be players that I just haven't got around to that are of interest. So, again, thanks for tuning in. I'll be doing this with the midfield and the forward line and the ruck, even though it's probably simpler and I've done a bit more on that individually, but I will do that. So stay tuned and I'll talk to you soon. Cheers.